have a chance to have an interactive Q&A session where all of you can have some follow-up questions on anything that Henriette talks about or other things that came up during IGF. So thank you very much. It's good to see you, Henriette. How are you?
I'm fine, Melinda, and it's good to see all of you. In fact, it's you probably weren't aware, but I actually joined your 2019 USA IGF Debrief. I think at that time I'd already been appointed as MAG chair, and I was feeling quite overwhelmed, and I thought, how can I learn more about this role? And I really like the idea of you doing a debrief, and very few NRIs do. So I went and joined, and you were all sitting around a table in a room somewhere, and I listened in on the session. So welcome and thanks, and great to be here. So let me just jump straight into, I hope my screen sharing. Can you either enable screen sharing, Melinda, or if you or Dustin can just go to the IGF website and go to the outputs of IGF 2020.
Henriette, it's enabled for you.
Perfect.
You should be able to do it now.
Thanks, Dustin. So just to give you the background, you probably know that there's a running discourse that's been going on for a few years, a debate as well as a discourse on the IGF and whether it should have outcomes, and if it should have outcomes, what kind of outcomes. And while there might not be complete consensus on the issue of outcomes, I think there is consensus on the IGF needing to focus its agenda more effectively, in a more targeted way. And what we tried to do this year, as the MAG, working with the Secretariat, was to design the program along 4 main themes. And those themes were were used for the call for workshop proposals. That still ended up actually giving us quite a wide range of questions and issues per theme. The themes were data, environment, inclusion, and trust. And so what we did with the Secretariat later on in the process was to try and distill from all the workshop proposals, the content that people like yourself and others in the community put into their workshop proposals, to distill key policy questions per theme. And this is what we came up with. And the idea was that if we can actually distill those core questions, it then becomes easier to capture the outputs and to package those outputs as responses to those questions. So I'm showing you the long version. The Secretariat has actually produced a shorter version, which is not quite ready for today, but which we will be able to share. So in the theme of data, quite broad, these were the following policy questions. There was one on what policies and concrete actions are needed to ensure the data collection and use can benefit all, including those in developing countries. And if you go and look at this document, which is on the IGF website, it's easy to find. You just go to IGF 2020 outputs. There you'll see what emerged from main sessions, from the high-level track, and from workshops. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you'll see that it reflects quite deep thinking on some of the challenging issues. I'll just highlight one, for example, the second last bullet on this page, nothing about me without me. That emerged as a core message that consent processes for data collection should be strengthened and made more transparent, in particular for marginalized communities and people in developing countries. And then this concept of data self-determination emerged, a very interesting concept. It's actually being developed by the Swiss government. They've got a non-paper on the concept of digital self-determination. So that is really what you have under data, and there's more. And then the second question focused in on regulation and protection of rights. And the third question in the data track looks specifically at COVID. But I think these would apply to any kind of public health emergency or any other kind of social emergency, and on how to ensure that data collection is used successfully, meet immediate policy goals, mitigates long-term economic fallout, but then also protect rights. So I won't dwell on those more. The reason why I think it's worth for you looking at this format of us representing the questions is that it can provide a way for you as the USA IGF to look at the content that emerged, and then to also reflect on how this content can be shared and who it should be shared with. Because I think one of the tricks or the challenges with this kind of huge event like the IGF is how to disseminate the outputs in a targeted way, how to take those policy responses to the data theme track questions and identify what's relevant to the private sector, what's relevant to the public health sector, what's relevant to the security sector, and so on. Then the second track was environment, and here you'll see there's actually some really interesting, it's a new theme for the IGF. It was the first time that the IGF dealt with environment and internet governance. And what emerged from this, and I won't go into detail, but have a look at it, because one of the topics that emerged is looking at infrastructure and making infrastructure more resilient. So that's, it's an interesting policy area of recommendations. It's very relevant to private sector actors that are building in infrastructure. It's relevant to community networks who are building community-based infrastructure. It's relevant to government and regulators. So have a look at those and see if you find anything that is actually relevant to you. And the same, I don't want to use up my time because we don't have a lot of time, but you'll find this format of output for all four of those themes: data, environment, inclusion, and trust. I'll just go to trust, which is the last theme. And there again, you'll see the distilled policy questions. These are based on the questions from the MAG, the questions that the community themselves identified, and then outputs and responses. So just before I end on this, to give you a little bit, I'm really just giving you a map to the outputs. The IGF produced a whole range of different kind of outputs. What I just ran through were the policy messages that emerged. But if you look at the IGF 2020 outputs page, you'll see there's also an overall summary. There's a report on the parliamentary round table, the legislatures that participated. There is also an output from the youth summit on the IGF. And if you look into the reports, you'll see also that the high-level track. The high-level track is not organized by the MAG. It's organized by the Secretariat and the UN, normally the host country. And there are also outputs that are included in those that could be of interest. But these draft messages per theme probably is the most concise window into IGF outputs. And I'll stop on that and we can have some discussion. I can just, you'll also, in fact, maybe just this will be the last thing I'll show you in case anyone has questions about participation. We had a fairly impressive IGF 2020. There were 6,136 participants from 173 countries. So, kind of the scale of participation was massive. And there were 275 sessions overall. So if you go to this draft IGF 2020 summaries, you'll get more of the metrics there as well as breakdown by stakeholder group. We had quite good private sector participation, 18.1%, and so on. So that you'll also find if you go to the IGF 2020 outputs page. So Dustin, Melinda, back to you. And I'm sorry this was so superficial and rushed, but let's open for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Henriette, for that overview and the guide through the portal, which will allow people to dive much deeper into all of these outputs. What we can do now is open the floor for any questions that you might have. We've baked in some time throughout this. We'll have questions and opportunity for discussion at the end of each section rather than saving it all for the end. So if there's anything you'd like to ask or any inputs, please shoot a hand up or go ahead and unmute yourself. And while we give an opportunity for people to shoot their hand up, Henriette, maybe you could speak a little bit about the opportunities to contribute moving forward from this year and looking into next year.
Thanks for that, Dustin. So as usual, the MAG will issue a call for taking stock on IGF 2020. That call will probably go out tomorrow, and that will give you an opportunity to reflect critically and constructively on how we did with IGF 2020. And in fact, if you can look at how we package the outputs and comment on that, that would be helpful as well. For 2021, the planning has just started. The MAG had its first call yesterday, and we'll issue a call for issues in January. So the process will be that we would like to, and this is towards this goal of having a more focused agenda. So we'll first ask for the community what issues, what themes they think we should prioritize, and you'll present us with input. And then in early February, the MAG will then work with that. And we hope distill that into a fairly narrow set of themes. And there's an ongoing discussion within the MAG itself, but also within the MAG working group strategy on how to design the IGF in a way that that keeps it bottom up and that keeps it quite broad and a platform where anyone, I'm looking at where Judith Hellerstein, where the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility can come and raise their issues. That's the strength of the IGF. So we want to maintain that. But on the other hand, there's also this demand to be more focused, to be more directed and responsive to current topical policy issues. Let's take the whole US debate at the moment on the regulation of platforms, on Google and antitrust. Those are very specific issues. So the question is, do we want the IGF to home in on those core issues? Do we want the IGF to remain this kind of open, broad-based platform that doesn't necessarily produce very targeted outputs, but it creates massive scope for participation and ownership by the community, the people who propose those sessions? So that's really the trick. And I think any comments or ideas that you have that can help the MAG design an IGF that retains that bottom-up quality, that openness, that ownership by the community, but that also makes it more strategic, able to respond to the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation, the demand for more high-level targeted influence and contribution to actual policy making would be very helpful. I think that's really, in a nutshell, Dustin, I think that's going to be the challenge for the MAG, how to be willing to change the design of the IGF. I think there is a demand for it, there's a need for it, but to do it in a way that doesn't undermine, the bottom-up open characteristics of the IGF. So
yeah, thank you.
So the deadline for that call will probably be the end of January. So you have time.
Okay, thank you. And we'll make sure that we distribute that out to our community as well to make sure that they have an opportunity for input as well as, directly within the steering committee. I saw, Courtney, your hand go up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Henriette, for that. I just wanted to zoom in on one thing you said towards the end about how you saw more, I think you indicated more participation from private sector. I know in the past couple of years, I think that had perhaps fallen off a little bit. And I'm wondering whether you think that had to do with the digital format and how, I think in addition to not only, the bottom-up process, there was a lot of discussion about how to maintain the digital virtual aspect, but also the in-person. And obviously the IGF does a lot to include, remote participation, but it still feels like second-class participation, I think, usually. And one of the big conversations I heard coming in the MAG is, how do we maintain the ability to participate virtually and at the same time get all the benefits that come from meeting in person? So kind of two-pronged question. And I think also with respect to like civil society, did you see more diversity of participation, especially from countries that are typically underrepresented because they can't get the visas or they can't afford the travel or whatever? Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney, and welcome to the MAG. I'm delighted to have you join the MAG this year. On the private sector participation, look, if you look at the stats, it's probably not vastly more than it has been. We're looking probably at a percentage point at most. I think there are two different discourses on private sector participation. On the one hand, I think the remote format did allow for more small and medium business participation. But there was also a critique that I've heard that there were not that many CEOs, or that if there were, they send pre-recorded video messages. So I think that there's often, my take on participation in the IGF is that people kind of discuss it and analyze it without actually looking at the goals that they're trying to achieve with it. As far as I'm concerned, having small and medium enterprise participation is as important as having CEOs of big multinational companies. On the other hand, for the IGF's legitimacy and profile, having CEOs is also relevant. And so it's kind of tricky. And I think that's part of what I said when the MAG has to balance out the kind of IGF that we want to create. But I do think the remote format did create more opportunity for business people all over the world to dip in and dip out in terms of civil society, but not just civil society. I think all stakeholder groups, participation was definitely more diverse. I think we'll still see the final analysis, but there was a democratization of participation that resulted from the virtual format. And that worked far better. The MAG has already resolved to build on that and not go back to, as you said, Courtney, that kind of second-class type participation, that remote participation used to be. And I think that's a design challenge, but that could be a hybrid IGF where you could actually have some online sessions, have the program be made up of a combination of virtual and face-to-face sessions, for example. I see there's a question in the chat from someone called Jonathan Brown on, does the bottom-up approach include the anti-censorship communities like Ultra, Surf, and Lantern? Now, I'm not sure if they specifically participated, but Jonathan, the idea is that yes, it would, because the bottom-up approach of the IGF is that we publish this quite, very broad set of themes, and we put out an open call for anyone to organize any kind of workshop that links to those themes. And so it was actually very inclusive. I think what some people are proposing for 2021 is to make that narrower, to work with themes, and then per themes have more specific policy challenges, and then make the call for workshop narrower, saying, please, if you want to participate this year, do a workshop, but your workshop has to address this particular challenge. So that's I'm not sure the MAG will go that way, but that's one of the proposals on the table.
Great, thank you, Henriette. And I think we'll need to move on to the next section, but there will be an opportunity for more discussion on all of this at the end. And thank you for joining us on a public holiday there, and understand if you have to jump off at any point.
That's great. Thanks, Dustin. I'll stay around for as long as I can. Have a good session.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
So with that, we want to shift the discussion here to a summary of the work of the NRIs, the national and regional initiatives, of which the IGF-USA is one. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Anya Gango from the UN Secretariat for the IGF to give us an overview there.
Well, thank you very much, Dustin, and almost good evening from Geneva. I guess still good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me and for organizing this meeting. So just to complement what Henriette said, the NRIs are to a good extent part of the IGF 2020 success thanks to their very successful collaborative effort in responding to a number of topics and themes that they've selected in a bottom-up manner. Concretely, the NRIs have organized the main session, of which the IGF-USA was part of. Throughout the year, they worked on gathering local inputs, clearing them with their multi-stakeholder organizing committees and the experts in the communities, which I know is very challenging and time-consuming as well. Successfully done that. The session was among the most visited session. I'm using that term because that's how you, I guess, count the records in Zoom online platform, which speaks about its success. In addition to the main session, the NRIs organized 7 collaborative sessions. Those are like workshop-like sessions. They were 1 hour long. All 7 were very interactive. They brought really local specificities on different topics to the IGF, and they've been well reported, and I'm sure will be foundation for our work in the next year. We've just a few minutes ago, we've just concluded the traditional NRIs coordination session, discussing mostly the improvements the NRIs collectively need in terms of the stakeholder engagement, particularly engagement with the parliamentarians and the governments, looking into the IGF's mandate, the project document, but also the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. That meeting also resulted in a number of action-oriented possible objectives we could be working toward in the next year. Specifically, some of the NRIs called for the Secretariat as well to convene something like an observatory for thematic overviews of all the NRIs. So it could be an interesting year. We'll see how it will develop further for next year. And finally, I just want to say that next week we will be issuing 2 publications, one on the youth engagement across the globe, with specific focus on the youth IGFs. And another one will be looking into the substantive areas the NRIs have discussed in 2019 and 2020 this year. This year definitely saw a shift in the narratives and priorities on the NRIs agendas, looking collectively. That's been very much impacted, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it will be interesting to look at that study when we issue it next week. I want to really thank the IGF-USA for all the support, not just in terms of your participation in the collaborative sessions and the main session, but we have a very good friendly relationship on many other matters. So you've been very active in all the calls that the IGF was issuing, and consultations on the roadmap, for instance, that the NRIs collectively were organizing. And special thanks, of course, goes to Dustin and Melinda, with whom we are working very closely, but also to a number of you that are on this call and are very, like Judith, for instance, that are very active with the Secretariat. So I know you're rushing, so I'll stop here, but please, I'll be here with you throughout the meeting. So if you have any questions, can respond in the chat or verbally. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya, for that update, and we'll certainly be hearing more from you as we plan for our 2021 conference, both the IGF-USA and the Global IGF. I know that Judith's hand shut up, and so we'll go to her quickly for a question. Judith, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Dustin. Yeah, my question is also relates to the data that Henriette showed out. So when we looked at when you showed about how many people came, and the representations, did you factor in any of the YouTube data? Because I know a lot of participants watched it on YouTube because either bandwidth issues or registration issues, they couldn't get, it was the registration process was a bit cumbersome. And so sometimes people missed it, so they watched on YouTube, or because bandwidth, YouTube compresses it. And so I was wondering whether that can be added to it, or how is that impacted in it? Thanks.
Anya, do you want to, Anya, you can elaborate. Judith, I will just say that the data that I showed does not include the live stream downloads on YouTube at all, not yet. So that would be a different data set, and I know the Secretariat is busy gathering that, but no, the data that's on the website at the moment would be the Zoom-based participation. Anya, do you want to add to that?
No, yeah, that's a very good question. And we've been noticing an impressive growth across the NRIs as well regarding the participation. It could be that we're having maybe different criteria how we count that. But to be concrete, yes, Henriette was speaking, I believe, about the number of registered participants. We also are seeing the number of views that were streamed through the YouTube, through the UN Web TV. Some sessions, as you know, were live streamed on Facebook. Those numbers are, of course, much, much bigger. So for instance, I'm just looking at the official statistics we have. We are formatting still. The YouTube saw over 23,000 views, more than 23,000 views with the, well, that's going to be relevant for you, with the top countries being the US, but also followed by Poland, India, Brazil, and so on. So I think that, that number speaks for itself. A similar number was also seen through streaming of the sessions through the UN Web TV. As you know, the high-level sessions and the main sessions were streamed also on that platform. So very soon we will be sharing this these numbers with you. But we are also very careful in how we explain the criteria for these statistics, because you can actually look at it from different aspects. So just to be honest there. But yes, those are the numbers on streaming.
Anya, can you also provide some context for all of our listeners here on the number of NRIs that are participating today, just the number of countries and the number of regional? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's yeah, thank you. I should have started with that actually. So in 2019 in Berlin, we've reported 122 officially recognized NRIs. That has changed until today. We have 134. So at the IGF 2020 was 131, but in the meantime, until today, we recognized 3 more. So we have 91 countries that have established their national IGFs, followed by, okay, now I'm speaking what I recall, hope I'm summing up well, followed by 19 regional and sub-regional IGFs and 24 youth IGFs. We are in a process of recognizing 3 more national IGFs and 2 more youth IGFs. So I believe that process will conclude early next year. Yeah, that's concretely on the numbers. In terms of the NRIs that were actively involved in organizing the mentioned sessions at the IGF 2020, I would say that around 85% were actively involved. We were able, of course, to follow the inputs for those that couldn't dedicate a focal point to the process to understand what's happening on their levels. And just on that point, on the point of numbers, promise I'll be brief, is that that what we see as a success is more relates to the quality, I would say. A number of the NRIs have started their processes as early as in 2006, 7, 8. But then over time, of course, there are different challenges, the best. So some of them, they kind of evolved through a more passive phase, I would say. So this year, for instance, saw the refreshment of different processes. The Arab IGF, as you know, we've been waiting for 3-4 years for their meeting to be kind of reactivated. We had such a good in-person meeting actually in January. They were one of the rare NRIs that managed to organize a fully on-site annual meeting. The same is with Malta National IGF. For years, we haven't heard from them, and now things are changing. So that's also a success that we are seeing with the Secretariat, and we're hoping to build on that for advancing those processes with the colleagues there. Thank you. Thank you, Melinda.
Great. Thank you, Anya. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to some of the overviews by theme. And we're going to start with the data theme and track, which at the IGF-USA over the past few years, we've had numerous sessions on this. It, of course, like most of these themes, is a perennial topic that we discuss. Comes in when we talk about artificial intelligence and privacy and other issues, but I'll hand it over to Pavlina Edelson from Diplo to give us an overview of how that conversation shaped up at this year's Global IGF before we have a little bit of discussion about this theme.
Well, thank you, Dustin. I'm happy to be here for Diplo. So this is our second debrief with the IGF USA. So very happy to be part of it. As many of you know, Diplo provides reporting from IGF. So we do have quite an overview of topics covered. So with respect to data, there were about over 25 sessions related to the data topic. And of course, the pandemic did not go by, and it was high on the agenda, especially with relation to data gathering and protection in times of COVID-19. And with relation to data discussed specifically were the health data, current standards of data protection, response to the pandemic through the new technologies. As the data is the core of COVID-19 analysis and tracking apps, concerns were voiced about data protection and privacy, and as well in trust in COVID data algorithm. This was especially with regards to the balance between right to privacy and protecting public health, while ensuring a return to pre-pandemic privacy rights and protections. One thing Henriette mentioned already, which was high on the agenda, was consent processes for data collection from users and how these can be strengthened and made more transparent, as they inadvertently affect the marginalized community and people in developing countries. To what level also was discussed, should the user decide on their own data collection and use when such consent is when such consent is informed, and the concept also mentioned by Henriette of data self-determination and the possible impacts. Looking at the use of data for good, it is important to support health organization and processes in this field and provide proper training to ensure the use of data and adequate protections in this sphere. Second topic discussed was emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and IoTs, and the related data sets. As usually, the emphasis was given to inclusive data sets and mitigation of bias, as not to amplify divides through artificial intelligence. And additionally, participants discussed how to mitigate the effects of deepening inequality between countries who are able to gather big data and take advantage of the benefits, and those who do not. So in these topics, this topic was discussed within the context of contact tracing apps for COVID-19 and health AI, but also on general principles. And the third topic is also a perennial one, it's free data flows, data localization, data sovereignty. And the main points were made about economies that depend on the export of digital services and the sharp decline they faced as a result of data localization measures. Discussed were also governing cross-border data flow as an important instrument in order to fulfill the development goals, SDGs, and the legislation related to it. So as far as legislation, it was discussed that it must consider innovative mechanisms that can balance privacy concerns on one end and economic and other benefits, and can benefit from sharing data across the borders. And within the cross-border data flows was another specific topic on data privacy and the different regulatory regimes of data privacy in different countries, how these affect the use of data. The participants agreed that data can no longer be considered a traditional good, and the initiatives for harmonization of regulations need to be taken in order to step forward and be actually able to take full use of data within global environment. And the last point was in the context of e-commerce, where it also popped up. The main topic was enhancing consumer trust through data regulation and its impact on new business models for inclusive development. And as was previously mentioned, the participants were the small and medium enterprises, which had a lot of input on this topic. So that's about it on the data itself. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Over to you, Dustin.
Awesome. Thank you, Pavlina, for that great update. So the way that we'll structure these discussions for the thematic portion of this is that you can ask questions if you have anything based on the update that you get, or it's also an opportunity to share any takeaways that you had from these particular thematic tracks. So to the extent that you participated in the IGF and want to share your outputs, we definitely want to hear what others took away as some of the most important conversations as well. So feel free to jump in here, and as we get going, you know, we'll get a cue. But if there's anybody that wants to jump in with any major takeaways from the data track, now's the time.
While we're waiting, I'll get us started. Pavlina, did you feel like there, oops, we've got our pets of IGF-USA active here this morning. I'm curious if there was, let's call it dominance in any particular privacy regime, for example, GDPR, that may have dominated the discussion as either a gold standard, something to look to, that other areas should adopt.
The GDPR was discussed in detail, of course, because it did have an influence on adopting in different countries similar regulations to GDPR. But the main discussion was focused on actually how to have a privacy regime comparable to GDPR within the national network, within the national frameworks. And especially in Latin America and Central America, this was the case where when something was taken over literally from the GDPR, it simply did not work within the national system. So that was the discussion. Also with the cross-border transfers, I mentioned different standards of privacy cost issues, for example, with the COVID-19 contact tracing apps, where the data could not be transferred for legal reasons. So it was discussed. It was discussed also in a sense of enforcement of GDPR. As you know, the second year review was published, I think, in May. So that popped up, but mostly about actual other countries adopting GDPR type regulations and what changes do they need to make it work for them on a national level.
Cool, thanks. And I guess if there's no more, if there are no more thoughts on data, we can move on to the next theme.
The next theme was trust, which is a very broad topic, and Pavlina mentioned it's something that can be used to discuss data. It could be security. It could be end user trust and reputation in systems. We have Courtney Ratch from the Committee to Protect Journalists that's going to give us an overview of that theme today. Courtney?
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, it was interesting to see how trust became one of the key thematic topics, because it did end up encompassing a really broad array of issues, both from being recognized as a prerequisite for the internet, both to work, but also as a tool of empowerment, the ability to freely express oneself, the engine of economic developments, the achievement of several sustainable development goals, the basic security, stability, and resiliency of the internet infrastructure, through to how the internet is actually used in daily life. And, obviously, not unsurprisingly, there was an undercurrent related to COVID-19, both in terms of the pandemic itself, as well as the governmental and industry responses to the pandemic. So, one of the interesting issues that was addressed was the importance of kind of national emergency crisis responses to address the pandemic and the role that the internet plays in that, but recognizing that people will not trust those, how important trust is, because if there aren't safeguards in place, and if there isn't the kind of groundwork laid in advance, that when a crisis emerges, that there will be several issues. It provided an opportunity to think about kind of the relationship between security, resiliency, and human rights, and people's kind of fundamental freedoms. And there were, several sessions that discussed kind of how do you think about these, and what are the trade-offs. One of them, for example, that I participated in was the Global Encryption Coalition first kind of global meeting, where we've seen, many governments around the world thinking about what role encryption plays, and it plays a different role in different types of debates. So, when we're talking about the online rights of children and protecting children, there is a different discussion happening than when we're talking about ensuring that economic activity can take place online. And then, of course, the role that encryption plays in enjoying human rights or not. So, it was a very kind of broad but multifaceted topic when that got to a range of issues of trade-offs, et cetera. There were kind of 6 thematic issues that were, or thematic policy areas that were identified. The first one was cybersecurity policy standards and norms. And that included not only kind of internet infrastructure, but also looking at Internet of Things, IoT. And one of the interesting outputs was a call for the creation of kind of cyber security, cyber resiliency, and creating a culture of that. So it's not just in this kind of narrow subfield of expertise, but realizing that cybersecurity is related to trust and undergirds a lot of the other issues that also have a dimension of trust. The second issue was the security, stability, and resilience of the internet infrastructure, systems, and devices. The third was the digital safety to enable a healthy and empowering digital environment for all. And it also stood out how there was an explicit recognition, again, the context that the pandemic provides, so many people working from home. And I would say adding to that, being educated at home or from home. And in this particular theme, what does that then mean for their both the availability of the internet, but more explicitly the security of the internet, and recognizing that this is going to likely continue to be a trend, and making sure that countries around the world and individuals around the world are prepared to do that, and needing to have the trust in place at all different levels to make that happen. Then the fourth category, trust, media, and democracy, had a lot of themes kind of related to false news, disinformation, hate speech, and how, there was quite a bit of content discussion or content related discussions under this theme. There's been a lot of, again, interest from a range of actors in issues related to content media moderation, related to the digital transformation of government during crisis, fact checking. There's a lot of kind of outputs related to fact checking and how important that is and how to support that, but also recognition of political interference in those issues and a recognition that everyone has a role to play in combating disinformation and in enhancing trust. The fifth category was trust and identity, and the sixth was the impact of digital sovereignty and internet fragmentation on trust. And one of the kind of overarching issues or outcomes that we saw was this emphasis on the importance of trust for cooperation, for both at the regional level, across stakeholder groups, the importance of trust for capacity building and for developing cyber norms. There was also a whole thread related to kind of children online, from gaming, protection, and several other issues. But recognizing that kind of this overarching theme in the trust category being that, the global cross-border nature of the internet is challenging this fundamental notion of sovereignty. And what does sovereignty mean in the digital age? How do we encourage collaboration in this internet, the kind of foundational vision of the internet as a global interconnected space, while recognizing that, that the rules that used to kind of govern scarcity and control have different implications in a data-driven economy, that there are many forms of data, and that, again, as we think about how to, as people were thinking about how to maintain the integrity of the vision of the internet as a place that you can conduct all of these important issues online, that fundamentally at the base of it is the need for trust. A couple of sessions I would point out was the Dynamic Coalition on Platform Responsibility put together a glossary, which I think was really interesting for platform law and policy terms. One of the ways of building trust is to understand that what we're talking about when we're having conversations. And so this was an effort to create from the ground up a glossary of terminology, which was really interesting. And of course, the importance of trust in information and in the media, which is inflected by the internet at every level these days. So I think I'll just leave it with there. So there's time for questions that hopefully I can answer. I did not take part in every session, so I hope that was a good overview.
Oh, it's fantastic. Thanks, Courtney. I think a thread that you've picked up on, that you've highlighted and that I saw, was that this need for an understanding that security and trust is everyone's responsibility. And I like that was openly discussed from not just IoT devices or how we access remotely the obvious things, but this recognition that from a security perspective, there's an increased threat vector that is human and psychologically based, to find that an employee in a company can be targeted and, through various means, become a vulnerability. So I like the acknowledgement and the fact that thread seemed to work through all of these different sub-themes. I don't see any hands up, so I think at this point, since Courtney's such a great—
Was that a hand in the chat from Peter? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great presentation. I did one panel that was on the trust spectrum. I don't know which one it was, but we did talk about stability and access issues as well as fragmentation. That was the workshop 326 on promises and perils of satellite internet. And it was really fun because we were able to touch on a number of different potential impacts from the human rights impacts and surveillance, with Jenny Stein from the State Department presenting their new guidance for the private sector on export of tech with surveillance capabilities. And so we got this kind of business and human rights piece at the forefront, actually from government, which was great. And then we made new contacts in the experts in this new and emerging field, like Larry Press, this academic in California, who actually gave a whole PowerPoint presentation on the sector, on the new tech and equipment and how it works. So really happy to have this educational component while bringing it back to core issues around governance. There's also, links to environmental impacts and some discussion of, who's responsible for all this junk we're sending into space, and robust participation. So, yeah, I have to say I was really happy with how it went. We got multi-stakeholder approach. We didn't get anyone directly from the business side of satellite services, but I think that's kind of what we were saying, was that we have expertise on environment, on human rights and business, on the submarine cable sector and system, where we've worked for a long time, and those developing this new sector should come to us because we can foresee some of the obstacles, the challenges, and also should have a voice in ensuring good governance, equity, and the distribution and safety and security. So it was kind of a flag we were putting up, and I was really happy with that. I was super happy with the Diplo Foundation's readout, like less than 24 hours later. There's that summary online. I was pretty psyched. And so thanks, Courtney and others, for organizing.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. In the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the inclusion section of the discussion, which has been an increasingly, it's always been important, but an increasing focal point over the past year, as we've kind of been able to kind of been forced to recognize the realities of this pandemic world. So I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to give us a readout of what was discussed at the IGF.
Thank you, Dustin. It's great to be here. I'm actually filling in for Anna Higgins, who wasn't able to come today, but I am Kelly Elkins from the Internet Society. I work in community engagement. So I'm happy, though, to give a quick readout on the main points and narratives from the inclusion track at IGF. As we know, there are many sides and dimensions to inclusion. There is the actual access to the internet infrastructure. There's the cost element of internet infrastructure. There's access to local content, fair education, and many more. There's also an element of making sure that vulnerable communities not only have a seat at the table when creating policy and technology, but are also encouraged and empowered to speak up, ensuring that their experiences and priorities are key factors in decisions. So again, it's nothing about us without us. I think that was said earlier. So at the IGF, we saw this manifested through a number of sessions. The access to infrastructure sessions addressed what meaningful connectivity looks like, meaningful and dependable connectivity looks like, and the importance of innovative approaches to increasing access. Some examples of innovative policy interventions are freeing up TV white space, encouraging more community networks, expanding rollouts for public institutions like libraries that can service many community members. Many sessions also considered vulnerable communities and the necessity of looping them into internet governance discussions without tokenizing them. Some of these communities include women and girls, the gender diverse community, people with disabilities, youth, indigenous communities, and more. So there are a few takeaways from these sessions. Number one, these communities must be involved at all stages of the policymaking and product development processes. No one knows better what policies and technologies will be best for communities than the communities themselves. They must be part of the process, and their priorities must become everyone else's priorities as well. It's particularly important to note that this should happen both with making policy and with making the actual technology, determining its features. That's like the baked in part. The technology itself should be inclusive and allow for everyone to use it equitably. For example, including local languages and ensuring that there are inclusive accessibility features for people with disabilities. 2 examples. Companies, governments, and organizations must promote, I'm on to the second key takeaway here. Companies, governments, and organizations must promote, empower, and safeguard local content and community-specific safe spaces. Local content is essential to preserve local cultures and languages. At the IGF, participants encouraged having more discussions around potential treaties to protect local traditions online. Number 3, intellectual property policies must be inclusive and protect communities. So we must ensure that communities can own their own content. For example, Indigenous communities creating content to preserve their own languages and cultures instead of somebody else doing it. Number 2, we must also ensure that IP laws are supportive of equitable access for education. For example, there's the issue of ebooks and textbooks, which can be priced far too high to be accessible to lower income populations. Number 4, the internet is essential for education, and everyone has a right to a fair and equitable education. The internet, in turn, has to be fair and equitable. It's important to have an open internet free of shutdowns. And like we discussed at our own IGF-USA session back in July, companies, governments, and organizations must ensure that educational institutions and public spaces like libraries have meaningful, dependable connectivity that can extend to learners. We saw a lot of them, libraries pivoting during COVID to shoot their internet out into the parking lot and really take that seriously for their communities. Short-term connectivity solutions for COVID have to adapt to become long-term solutions. So again, some of those things that did happen and are still happening during the pandemic, really not going backwards after that and adapting those to making sure that those are long-term changes. Internet governance policies should also consider independent journalism and the importance of local public access to necessary information, necessary public information, especially as we rely on it more than ever during this COVID health public crisis. The key takeaway from this track is that multi-stakeholderism is more important than ever to create fair and equitable policies and tech, and to mobilize resources. For many of these issues, we know what needs to be done, and now it's a matter of committing to it, baking it into the process, and using multi-stakeholderism to affect change and implement inclusion. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you, Kelly. Is there anyone else that wanted to add briefly on this track before we move on to the environment theme?
Hi, it's Judith. I would like to add on this track also, Kelly touched on a little bit, but we also had a session on the local language, Indigenous languages, and how languages can be sort of transcribed into text or other areas, and so that languages which are thought could have died out could then be saved. And there was a panel on that where we had featured someone from one of the Indigenous communities talking about, I think, the Cherokee language and how that they managed to revive that and save it, and working on those issues. So that I wanted to add that point. But there was also a couple of sessions on accessibility with Internet of Things and other areas where accessibility and people with disabilities were featured in. and things that you would not necessarily think of earlier on. But there were tons of sessions there. Many of them were excellent. And I just wanted to highlight some of those that were not included in Kelly's excellent summary.
Thanks, Judith. That's
Awesome.
important to remember all the different the definitions here and what inclusion actually includes. So with that, let's talk about the fourth and final theme of IGF, which was environment. First time for IGF, and it's not something that we have attempted to tackle yet at IGF-USA. So excited to hear the summary, and Pavlina is going to help us again with the rundown on the environment track.
Thank you. So, as you said, the waste and environment was there for the first time at IGF. And there were three main points of discussion within this topic. So the first one was the impact of ICTs on climate change. So on first sight, the use of ICTs has a positive effect on CO2 emissions. There are concerns around the energy consumption, material inefficiency of ICTs, and e-waste. And according to the statistics mentioned in one of the sessions, it will lead to 14% of total CO emissions in 2030, which is surprising for me to hear that it's that high. So one of the issues is devices with limited lifespans that are continuously manufactured, and they are killed and are obsolete by design. And their lifespans, in addition to that, are becoming shorter. And of course, that is environmental impact and negative environmental impact. And it was concluded that what is needed is a return to a circular economy with devices recycled, repaired, refurbished, and reused. And governments and companies need to set standards for environmentally conscious creation of digital goods. What was also mentioned was users' awareness of their carbon footprint in their digital actions, not only on the hardware side and equipment, but also on their online searches and other digital actions. That being said, it was noted that all this makes it challenging to achieve both SDGs on the environment and bridging digital divide on the other side. So the issue of digital and climate change are closely intertwined, and are closely intertwined to the development of the least developed countries. And it was concluded that connectivity needs to be sustainable. Second topic discussed was the reverse one was impact of climate change on ICTs, especially on core infrastructure. And in case of environmental disasters, the core infrastructure is not likely to cause failure or have major physical damage as a whole, but it is of essence in cases of disaster, of course, due to connectivity and ability to communicate and aiding in the work of first responders and emergency crews. And it was concluded that there needs to be planning for emergency cases and strengthening of current infrastructure system to withhold environmental impacts. Now, the third topic is how can ICTs help with climate change issues? And it was concluded that in order to make progress on environmental issues, more data is needed to monitor the state of environmental degradation. The data which exists is still not widely shared, and it needs to be explored what impact can artificial intelligence have in climate action and disaster mitigation. So to round up, it was concluded that collective data governance could be fostered through the IGF, and it was noted that the IGF is recognized as an appropriate forum for stakeholders to meet and create an environment data governance framework. So that is something to be considered in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavlina. Do we have any questions about this theme? Okay. All right then. Very interesting. Thank you to Lena, Courtney, and Kelly for giving us a summary of each of these important themes. At this point, we've budgeted some time for an open discussion, sort of a catch-all to see if there were any other questions that had popped up through the overall summary from Henriette, the NRI discussion from Anya, or any of these themes, or any other general discussion about the 2 weeks that was the online, the virtual 2020 IGF. I think everybody's acting like it's a snow day. So quiet.
It is a snow day, at least over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In DC, it's the snow until the weather gets a little warmer, and then it changes to rain and yuck.
Yeah. Right now we've got the lovely big snowflakes, but
Jonathan here from Coburg, Canada. I have a question to pose.
please.
It's related to data sovereignty and global trade. I'm wondering if the IGF has had any contact with the stakeholders involved at the World Trade Organization and the whole discussion around data sovereignty and taxation. So it's not just the data tracking, but it's also the tracking of the expenditures by both the private sector and the public sector.
So I can jump in here. I can say that the IGF-USA has not had those discussions. I know Anya is still on, so if she wants to weigh in about the global IGF and any discussions that were held there, Anya, go ahead and do so. But
yeah, thank you, Dustin. Well, I can't say a lot except that I know it was definitely on the agenda. You know, the Secretariat it's kind of neutral facilitator of the process. It was definitely on the agenda, discussed by the various community actors. Concretely on the involvement of WTO, I can confirm that they were involved in the high-level track of the IGF 2020 and on the high level, on the level of the director for sure. But the discussions did go in a bit different, I have to say, direction, just because of the topic and the orientation of the high-level track. It was mostly focused on the role of the internet in emergencies, with a specific focus on the impact of the pandemic. So that was kind of more broader, high-level overview, and the central role, of course, data, big data, open data, and the sovereignty in that sense has. But as I said, nothing specific regarding the high-level track. But I can look more precisely to respond into the data track and look which stakeholders discuss from which aspect these discussions, and then communicate back by email.
Yeah, that would be good, because I know that a lot of the indigenous communities and civil society movements have expressed concern about not being at that table.
yeah, thank you for that. And so I'll pass on your contact information to Anya, using whatever contact information you registered for this with, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, great. So we just have a few minutes left, and so want to kind of start a bit of a transition here and just wrap up this section with a reminder that all of these, while this debrief was about looking back at the discussions, we need to be looking forward about how we continue to address all of the important topics and how we address that from the IGF-USA's perspective. We will begin planning for our 2021 process in January. We're going to start with kind of an orientation of sorts for anyone who's new that would like to get involved in the planning process, so they can come to the first meeting prepared. that'll be the week of January 11th through the 15th. And then we'll have our first steering committee meeting the week of January 18th through the 22nd. And there will be calls for topics as well as a survey that follows that in terms of driving our direction for 2021. And so, Melinda, is there anything you want to add before we go to just a really quick break here?
I just want to clarify the session, or our kickoff session in January, that is a sort of beginner's guide. I highly encourage anyone who's interested in participating at the steering committee level, working on creating panels, that's new to that. Please tell folks in your network that you think might be interested or have expressed an interest. We're acknowledging that it's difficult to jump into this midstream. Once we go through a survey process and pick topics and establish, panel committees, that it can be difficult. So we're creating this sort of beginner's guide to help facilitate that transition and make certain that everybody has a chance to participate as robustly as they want or can.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Melinda. And with that, thank you all for joining the debrief. We're going to stay in this room for a reception to honor the memory of Marilyn Cade, and it will just be an opportunity to kind of share stories and memories. But there's really no easy way to switch gears here. So let's take just a real quick break to get some water or coffee and be back in about 2 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, everybody, we're gonna get started back up here in just a second. All right, so thank you everybody for joining us for this opportunity to honor and remember Marilyn for everything she did for us as a community and individually. Under normal circumstances, would have liked for this to be an intimate in-person gathering where we could share our favorite stories and memories. But of course, there are benefits to this online format. There are a number of people, thankfully, that we're able to include in this conversation that are from out of the DC area, so that's a benefit as well. And Maryland's reach extended well beyond the DC area. So it's great that we're able to hold this virtually as well. So we really want to maintain the kind of intimate nature of the in-person gathering here. So while we will utilize a queue here and do raise your hand if you want to speak, if you want to build on what somebody says, feel free to chime in there and make it conversational. So and we'll make sure that everyone who does raise their hand gets an opportunity to share. We have this scheduled to, you know, wrap up at 1, but if there are people who 1 Eastern time, but if there are people that want to continue to share, we can leave it open a little bit longer. So I know we all have many memories of Marilyn, too many to share during this time, but we look forward to everything that we're able to share today and you know, contribute to documenting the legacy of everything that Marilyn did, including all the intangible aspects of her contributions that can really only be captured in the stories and the memories. And they did hold a really nice event at the IGF a few weeks ago. You should check out that if you have a chance. And also there's an opportunity to share memories on the IGF website, which we can post the link to in a second. So, you know, what she meant to this community is just, it's very hard to describe, but she had a presence that was always felt and continues to be felt in a way that really makes us all better. And so before we get started here and open up the floor, we wanted to do something special to memorialize Marilyn's unparalleled contributions to the IGF-USA. Contribution to a particular group is so significant and it can never be replaced or replicated. And in the world of sports, these legends are often remembered with retiring of their number so that it's never worn again by a member of that team. And so Marilyn, of course, did not have a jersey or a number, but she was a legend and had a unique role and title within the IGF-USA that can never be filled. And there will never be another person that can nor should bear the title Chief Catalyst of the IGF-USA. So we'd like to announce our plans to officially retire the Chief Catalyst title, which will forever remain synonymous with Marilyn Cade, with great gratitude for her tireless contributions to the community. And so, like I said, want to open this up for an intimate discussion and conversation and share the memories that we have. Melinda, I'll hand it over to you first.
Dustin mentioned the lovely service that was put together by the IGF Secretariat in the beginning of November. I wanted to kick us off in our discussion and our memory sharing here today with some of the things that struck me about that service. I admit that I started when we joined quite sad. In fact, I don't think he's on here, but Mike Nelson was private chatting me. Try to smile. But it was tough. It was a hard week that, in learning what had happened, the context of it happening at the beginning of IGF, given what happened 1 year prior in Berlin when she fell so ill and was taken to the hospital. It was a lot to handle. But as the service unfolded and people shared their stories, everybody, myself included, right, started to smile. You could not enjoy the regaling of all of the various Marilyn stories. And the things that they included were so positive, so important to where we are today, that we have this strong NRI network that Janya had mentioned and discussed earlier, was because this was someone who just did not take no for an answer and drove inclusion. She wanted everybody to participate, and not just passively. This was someone who, that grab you by the elbow and make certain that you knew people, that you were introduced, that she had this shepherding role, that she encouraged active participation, that you would contribute, getting members, people to apply to the MAG, to participate in their NRIs. It was a really beautiful unfolding of all of these sort of stories. So I encourage all of you today to feel free to share some of your own personal stories, whether it's the elbow tug or, the anything else that you might have heard, so that we can all have the moment to honor her and to smile, to look back and say, well, we miss her, and that's a sad thing. It's a part of life, and that we can be very happy about the contributions that she made.
Thanks for kicking us off there, Melinda. There were two hands that have gone up, so want to go to, hopefully in the right order here, but go to Brett first and then Brian. And Brett, you're on mute.
I'm sure there were several times that Marilyn wished I was on mute. She was very direct. One of the things that many may not realize about Marilyn, in a way, was her beginnings. There's no question that she, in terms of the internet governance and a lot of the work that's been done, she was royalty. But royalty in the unique type that America created, where there was no royalty. Because where you came from wasn't important anymore. It was who you served and what you did with what you were given. And Marilyn started really at the bottom. She was a technician. She was out installing. She started at the bottom. And she became the spokesman in a very real way for AT&T as we were starting up, talking about this future information infrastructure. I remember going to her office one time, and we had this little committee, and we met, and she was showing us how they had rigged up the ability to finally do some video calling and all sorts of little things. But there was a committee that came together, and it was called the High Performance Computing Communications Committee, and it was sort of sponsored by the American Electronics Association, but it had some of the key stakeholders, and Marilyn was one of the people that approached me and asked if I would chair it. And everyone on that committee are people that many of you would have eventually known. John Roberts was one of them. But it was remarkable just watching her complete passion for everything, but her graciousness as well, and her genuine humility as she was doing what she knew, and we all knew would become great things. So she was someone that literally served and cared. She cared for the relationships, she cared for the people, but she cared for the future. And she worked passionately because she'd just started out working hard, and suddenly she became one of the great top authorities, really, in what it is we're seeing created. So that friendship continued, and I was just amazed as I would see her from time to time and watch the impact and how she gave and brought so many people into the process. Most of you. So that's just my personal contribution. I really grew to love her dearly and treasure her. The fact that I even had the privilege of knowing her when she was in every stage of what's happened since 1990.
Thanks, Brett. That was really powerful. So next we'll go to Brian, and then John, and then Rick.
Thanks. Good to see everyone. And it's a pleasure to follow Brett and a challenge to follow Brett in terms of telling a good story. Marilyn and I, our relationship predated ICANN. She worked at AT&T in the mid-90s, and I worked at Teleglobe, the Canadian international telecom carrier. And we first engaged and worked together, and we worked together on an issue of the amount of internet traffic that was transiting through the US versus other parts of the world in the early days of the internet. And that was important because international telecommunications carriers pay each other in settlements based on the amount of traffic they hand off to each other. So this was one of the early hot issues of contention on a global scale. And in this one, Marilyn and I happened to be on the same team. And we did some great work together, and that's where I got to know her. And that was really important because when we got into ICANN together and started working in that environment, we were often enough on different sides. And despite the fact that we were on different sides, we had established a relationship, a friendship, a camaraderie. And those of you who know Marilyn, that's so important because she was one of those people who really had the ability to disagree or agree to disagree civilly. And I really cherish the fact that I had that foundation of friendship with her that we continued to build on, but she's always had that ability, whether she's had a long-standing friendship with you or not. I recently was elected to the executive committee of the IGF Support Association, and noted, of course, that I was coming into that role as Marilyn was stepping off. And she had sent me a couple of texts and said, you know, Brian, we really need to chat and catch up. I'd like to give you my views on things. And I was very much looking forward to that conversation. It never happened. That exchange literally happened just a few days before she passed. And I remember sending a text back and not hearing from her and for a while and wondering, and then I got the news. And that is such a regret of mine that I didn't get the benefit of her thinking and her view on how we can take the IGF-USA forward. There's a lot to Marilyn. And in trying to share with you all maybe one central thought. I had posted on Facebook a month or so ago just my own thoughts on how divided we are as a country with respect to politics, and offering some thoughts about how can we move past that, how can we come back together country. And in one of the comments underneath that post, Marilyn posted this: as we mourn the loss of civility and compassion, we can also model and teach it, including my speaking up and voting. But civility and compassion are taught, something we can all pass on. She had tireless energy, a remarkable tireless energy, just incredible. And I think one last thought is we all have our particular positions or areas of interest that we are promoting at any given time, whether it's IGF or ICANN or some other forum. I like to remember Marilyn as making me look up and making me look at the bigger picture and beyond my own narrow interest, and put my energy toward the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for sharing. So we'll go next to John.
So I have very strong memories of Marilyn, going to various meetings worldwide, seeing her in DC frequently, online, whatever. I have a little more complicated picture of Marilyn, because when I first met Marilyn is when the DC chapter of the Internet Society sort of took over being the secretariat. And I don't think Marilyn trusted that anyone was going to do what she wanted to do or could do with, and what she was so devoted to, and bringing people in and being open. And I actually was assigned to sit next to her to prevent her being quite as disruptive as she sometimes was during these initial meetings. But the wonderful thing was that over the period of time when she saw that, yes, we were devoted to making sure the IGF-USA would be follow in what she believed it ought to be doing, the openness and whatever, she became a really, a close friend. I mean, I didn't have as long a relationship, but anywhere I went, she would love to say, okay, do you have a second for coffee and can we catch up? So I'm not going to say long, but I would say that sometimes she wasn't quite, she was pretty clear when she thought something was going wrong. And as I said, I worked with her to maybe not be quite so disruptive in the meetings anyway, but I love Marilyn. And the nice thing is, one of the last times I really heard her, she gave a talk at the virtual the VSIG that was running, and she talked about what her interests were. And I think it'd be great to get that and share that around. So again, and I really appreciate the people who've known Marilyn longer and have seen her all over the world, and what they did at the IGF really in her memory was fabulous. So great.
Thanks, John. We'll go to Rick next, and then Courtney after that.
Hi, thanks for doing this. First of all, this is, Marilyn, I don't think we can do enough to thank Marilyn for her contributions to internet governance, ICANN, IGF. Everything that we all spend hours doing the foundation was laid by Marilyn Cade. I first met Marilyn and Sarah Deutsch at the same time. I had just been hired as the first director of e-commerce and internet technology at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in 1999. And the two of them came to talk to me about this entity that had been created called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigning Names and Numbers, and some concerns that were being raised around basically who is, which is kind of funny because we still have that conversation today. But what people don't realize is that Marilyn coming to the chamber and getting the broader business community involved is really what helped save ICANN in the early days. There was a lot of effort on Capitol Hill to bring ICANN and move everything within the Department of Commerce by very powerful members in the Senate and the House. And Marilyn and Sarah came to us and said, look, there are some serious flaws within the ICANN process. We all know the trademark issues, the DNS abuse. There's a lot of things going on, but she firmly believed that it was in the best interest of the internet and the future of the internet that we create a nonprofit. And with that, that's why I'm so passionate about ICANN and the IGF, is that I don't want to see her legacy of all the hard work that she's put in go to naught because we don't remember what the core values of ICANN. But there are very few people in this town and in this space who are doers. There's a lot of talkers. There's a lot of people who just show up. But Marilyn was tenacious in her advocacy, in her outreach, and wanting to create an environment where everybody felt comfortable to say as they felt, but also trying to achieve the common goal of a broad internet governance platform and the future of ICANN and the IGF. But some people may say that the worst thing was maybe that she brought me into this space because of my strong views. But I learned from the best of how to have strong views, which is Marilyn. But I also think that the depth and the hours that she spent in helping create what we know as internet governance, I just hope that we are able to capture that and remember that and put her to the level of some of the folks who sometimes get a lot of praise for being the father of the internet. Marilyn was the mother of the internet and internet governance. She just did so much behind the scenes that really created this wonderful world on the positive side of what we are doing today. And my heart goes out to her. My thoughts and prayers are with her, where she in a better place. But she was a wonderful person, determined, strong, insightful, and really was just a great person that I got to know for a very long time and was proud to call her a friend.
Thanks, Rick. Man, it'll be a tough task to keep that work going without Marilyn, but an important one. So we'll go to Courtney next, and then Garland, and then Lucifer.
Thanks. I just want to say something because I didn't know Marilyn that long, but as a powerful advocate in a space that was traditionally dominated by men, I found her a really great role model. And I don't think I knew her as well as many of you, but I just want to share, how influential and what a role model she was as, for women, as a woman looking to be more active in this space. And, I remember when I first got involved a few years back in IGF-USA, I think it was the first time was meeting her, and like her and Shane were kind of having this discussion, and I had not seen the passion between two women who had very strong opinions about things, and yet we're working together in this space to make things happen. And yeah, her, I'm learning a lot about, her history in the field here, but it was very clear, I think, just from, knowing her through a variety of different venues and seeing her at the IGF and in our own kind of DC crew here, just how much she used kind of her role on behalf of others. And I just always appreciated her having time to speak and being a role model. So just thought I'd share that.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm sure you're not alone in that viewing her as a role model. I'm sure she had a positive influence on so many women making their way in the space. So we'll go to Garland, Lucivis, and then Anna.
Mute. There we go. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. So a couple of things first, on her passing. I was first and foremost in my relationship with Marilyn was as much a friendship for myself and also my family as anything. We're not that far away from where Marilyn lived, and she'd come over for dinner. I'd go over there. I've been a part of just just being sociable, listening to her, just being with her, whether it's her place, coffee down there in Falls Church at the Seven Corners, Starbucks or whatever, and benefiting the whole way. It's but to give you a little timeline here, I got a call from Joe Gattuso being concerned about Marilyn, if I'd heard from her recently, and I said I hadn't. I just figured she's very busy with the IGF. And anyway, I tried to reach her. Then I went over, and only to discover from her neighbor that she had passed that night. That morning in the hospital. They had come. The neighbors had called, having been concerned, and the first responders came and got access through a window and got her out. She was not conscious, but alive when they brought her out of the house. And as much as I really tried when I'd go over there to help her with the sprawling place she had, and I don't know if you all are aware of this, that there was a fire was started in the house, and she had to move out, and I was there helping her move to a place. Fortunately, she got something very, very close, just literally a couple blocks away there in the Lake Barcroft housing community there to rent, and then helped her, particularly when all the boxes of stuff came back that were all obviously taken out while they did the renovation after the fire. But she still had that. I was so concerned because going in well before Berlin and after the fire, she had that consistent cough. And she just, would, I'd bring it up, she'd push back, and, Marilyn was Marilyn, and you could express your concerns, but that was, then you had to sort of stop on a personal level. And I just really loved her. I loved her as a human being. I really did. I met her in 95. She introduced me to everybody. I was with a think tank at the time, the Progressive Freedom Foundation. Its chairman was Jay Keyworth. I'd worked with Keyworth when he was a National Science Advisor for Reagan. And she, we immediately sort of got in lockstep. She introduced me to just everybody that were players there at the early days of setting up the governance part of it, working with Ira Magaziner, Esther Dyson, some of the Jerry Berman, some of the early folks, and some of the really pivotal folks that allowed for the internet to particularly the commercial part when it went commercial, the network solutions. That was a ride and a half. Really begin to flourish. Again, the pivotal piece that unfortunately Trump has gone after, that allowed sort of the safe harbor piece that said, that ISPs, we needed them to do notice and takedown, and we need them to do due diligence, but we couldn't expect to hold them to be the policemen of the internet. That was just a bridge too far. And so many important things she was a part of, so many introductions she made. And the great thing about her is we shared a common passion, as with Manu and many others, in trying, as we like to say, finish the job. Bringing broadband to those who need it most, finishing the job of really trying to bring all the citizens of Earth onto this platform, intending to both the reliability, the price points, the education that sometimes is an issue, and I just from the moment I met her, as everybody has said before, just an incredible force, not only professionally but also personally. As I said, just great with my daughter. She'd have her come and be part of the IGF-USA there, helping to film and to take notes and just be a part of it. My wife and we just loved her. Whenever we could get together, we'd do it. And so I've missed a friend. I've missed someone who, as others have said, would just introduce you to everybody. I mean, she knew everybody, and she just made sure you were introduced to everybody. I mean, it was just a global community, and I just love the fact that she stayed incredibly focused, as I've tried to be, on finishing the job, as in bringing the remaining billions to the table. I'd always work with her because I didn't like to be the presenter, if you will, of the workshops that I pulled together. And I remember the one in Zurich that was Geneva, sorry, that was just great. I had Manu there. I think maybe the last one he did, I'm not sure. I had, of course, Vince Cerf. I had really a great party, and we were talking about that, not only the incredible importance of the internet, but also electricity, the payment systems, the fact that it's going to take multiple networks to complete the picture here, to bank the unbanked, to facilitate that part of it, to ensure, as I think everybody knows, the challenge of electricity that exists beyond the city centers in a lot of developing countries, and that being a very important component to providing access. And so the full picture, if you will, the full UN strategic development goals. And I lost a friend, I really did. And I tried to, as much as I could, be a part of a supportive part, both in our shared goal, but also as in her personal life. She's a great lady, and I enjoyed. She'd get me passes. They had the lake, and since she was an owner there, we'd get go out and sit on the little beach they had there in Lake Barcroft, and you could swim and anyway, just a delightful lady, just a delightful member of the family. So that's it for me. It was 95 to God, that's decades of adventures. I could go on and on, obviously, but I'll leave it at that before I get too emotional at my age. But anyway, so thank you for letting me have. And I was great that this is so many people have been touched by her. That's clear. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Garland, and thank you for everything that you did for Marilyn as well.
Wow, it was a great honor to do it. It wasn't like a job, right? It was just sort of, she was just a great lady, great place to hang with, really was. So sorry. So anyway, I'll get off now.
Thanks, Garland. So Lucivies and then Anna.
Thank you so much, Dustin, and thank you, Garland, for sharing that. I didn't know Marilyn as long as you did, but it's a great loss when you've been friends for so long. And it's also, I would say, wonderful for a man to show his emotions. And I think it's really important that we can all be here together. I wasn't able to attend the IGF memorial, and I think it's so good to see everybody and that we can do this together, because sometimes it feels really intangible. that someone is gone and you'll never see them again, and you don't get to like hold each other and hug each other and remember. So thanks for letting me join in. I have one small advantage over all of you, which is that in Holland it's 6 p.m. So I got the wine out, so we can toast to Marilyn's memory. I have just two things I wanted to say. One is that multi-stakeholder communities, societies, no organization can function without people like Marilyn, because you need someone who has the courage to walk up to the microphone at every single meeting and say, I am Marilyn Cade, and then to talk truth to power. And that's the only way to hold people to account, to hold organizations to account. And I can tell you, as a former member of the ICANN board, there was this like, but what's Marilyn going to say? What's Marilyn going to do? So it is an essential part of any democracy, of our system of accountability, that people like Marilyn are there. And so I think that's an amazing contribution that she made at ICANN and at IGF. And the other one, and I really wanted to echo what Courtney said, as a female role model, not just, being who she is and inspiring others and being so inclusive and welcoming. I was new to the internet space when I joined the ICANN board, so it's great. All the people who take you under their wing, and Marilyn, of course, is like, a godmother to us all. But what I found especially amazing is the individual empowerment of women and encouraging them. And Marilyn Albright has always been a very strong one about, women supporting other women. So I want to kind of paraphrase something that Marilyn Albright said, because she did the negative one. I think we do the positive one, which is that there's a very special place in heaven for women who help other women. So I know that Marilyn has a very special place in heaven, and I'll raise my glass to that. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you, Lucifer. And I'll toast with my water. So we'll go ahead and hand it over to Anna now. And then anybody else who would like into the queue can raise your hand as well.
Yeah, I want to echo what's been said about Marilyn and her support of women. I think that I came to ICANN as a really young woman, and to a space that you didn't think that there were many women who were, there. And Marilyn was a force, and having pivoted into looking at the history of women and sort of shaping the internet that we have and know today, it actually was her example that really has pushed my work to rethink how we do history, because Marilyn was a champion of her story. And I think that is something that you have to witness, and you can't be taught. You have to witness people being their own champion. And that was one of the most profound examples of it. And it continues to be a thread in the work that I do, and in the way that I teach young women about including voices in history, that you don't need to be, right? You yourself, that you can be your own champion of your history, and that you don't need to have other people write it for you. I think that is really, really important, especially as we move forward in hoping, to diversify further this space. So yeah, I want to echo what's been said about the power of Marilyn as an example. And I hope that, that her example, because she wasn't afraid to step up to the mic, right? Because there are those recordings, and that's so powerful, that her example can live on. And that's actually so wonderful. So, I'm thankful that she had the confidence, the continued confidence to keep getting up in the face of, pushback, of, people who wanted to maybe silence her or marginalize her work, and that she kept getting up, and that I'm thankful that that's recorded, because these are things that we can pass on, that we can teach, our children, our students. And so, wherever you are, Marilyn, thank you for, making that legacy possible.
Thanks, Anna. And I just wanted to follow up on some of the discussion about her being a force at the mic at the public forum. My first ICANN meeting in Buenos Aires, I just remember her walking up to the mic before I even knew who she was and just standing in front and saying, "I'm back." And I was like, who is this woman? And then kind of in line with that, when I was working with ICANN Wiki, we'd do a lot of these cartoons that would capture different kind of relevant community aspects in our cartoons. And we had this cover of the Quick Guide one time where it was, we had the illustrator build it in so that Marilyn was in line for the public forum 3 times. And kind of did that without her knowledge. And that was just when I was getting to know her. And so I was a little bit terrified to see what her reaction would be to that. And she approached the booth and, you know, said, "Oh, so I heard you included me on the Quick Guide cover," and then gave that pause that she would do for dramatic effect before saying, "I love it." And then she proceeded to give me a lot of input on how it can be improved and ideas for the next one. And that trend would continue, whether it was related to ICANN or IGF-USA or anything else that either of us was involved in. And her input, you know, was even if not always solicited, was always something that pushed it, challenged it, and made the work better. And she was always willing to speak up and be that force that would not let you be complacent in what you were doing. And that was something that I always appreciated about Marilyn, and will continue to try to challenge myself in the way that she would. And you know, ever since that moment, once she explained to me what the acronym FOM meant, Friends of Marilyn, once she, you know, added me into that club, it was introductions, challenging me in a positive way, and we'll always be thankful for that. So I'm happy to continue this conversation. If there's anybody else that would like to jump in, feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. But if not, thank you all for joining and being a part of this opportunity to memorialize Marilyn. And
Hi, Dustin. Sorry, I was on another call, so I couldn't get, which ended early, so I couldn't get in my represent my remembrance of Marilyn. But Marilyn is indeed a very big force for everyone. And I'm, like you said, she took you by the side, she introduced you, she figured out, how do you want to get involved? What can I get you engaged in? What can we work with you? How do we get more people working? She not only did the, for the IGF, but she was also trying to get us involved in other different areas. And always willing to also help out on anything, like, oh, do you need a ride home? Do you need a ride to this place? Do you need a ride, you know? So the Friends of Marilyn was not only just, you know, work issues. It's like, how can I get you engaged? How can I help you out? And so she never let us know that she needed help herself. And to that, it's sort of like, sorry about that, because I think she would have had a lot of people who would have jumped in to help her. But she definitely will be missed, and I know she made such an impact, and she's one of the reasons that the IGF-USA has been around for so long. It's because it was her. She funded the earlier ones herself.
Dustin, hey, it's Steve Del Bianco. I would just like to add that FOM at times, in my experience, would stand for foes of Marilyn, not just friends of Marilyn. And I worked with her over 30 years, almost always in a position where she was the chair of the BC and I was working to keep her happy. And there were times that I was a foe of Marilyn, but for any of you who crossed Marilyn, as I often did, things got very difficult and very delicate until you came around to see her wisdom, her desired approach, until you came around and paid her the due respect that she deserved for the position that she took. And when that happened, you have to acknowledge that her edge and her intensity were always deployed in service of what she had in her mind as her vision for how things were going to work out, both for that institution and for the transaction, whatever it was, a motion, a resolution, or a vote. And so it seemed as if it was about Marilyn, but it was about Marilyn because she had in mind how she wanted things to work out. And I really grew over 30 years to respect that her sentiments were headed in the right direction, even if it was a challenge to be able to work as an effective teammate. So her legacy on internet governance is important, and you probably have already covered that. But for me personally, her legacy is that I'll never forget the imprint that she made on me about being passionate and persistent about details that you think are important and visions that you want to try to see realized. So Marilyn, hats off to you. I toast you, and I hope that I can live up to your legacy.
And you can see the impact that it's had on both Steve and myself, if you've ever seen us engage with each other, and that passion. And it really is from that core of Marilyn and the belief and trying to get things in the right place. And it was never personal. It was always more the vision. And that's the thing that's, when someone was talking about elections and what's going on now in society, it was always about policy and it was never personal. And you can be passionate and still be friends. And so you can be a foe of Marilyn and a friend of Marilyn at the same time. And I think that is what was powerful. And those of us who were, again, doing this for a very long time, we agreed to disagree on a lot of different issues, and we agreed to agree on a lot of other issues. But it was never personal. And with Marilyn, that was key. It was passion about policy, but not passion trying to get after somebody's personal views. And I think that's what we can take away from her legacy, especially as with the IGF and others grow even bigger and bigger. We just have to be respectful of one another, even though we can still be passionate.
Perhaps I can say something. This is Joe Gattuso from the Commercial Law Development Program. I've been quiet at these memorials, but I think maybe I should say something as long as my connectivity holds. Marilyn really made possible all of my work involving the Internet Governance Forums, which included bringing in countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan and many others more recently. I knew Marilyn when she worked for AT&T. I had a different job at the Commerce Department, and she came in on behalf of AT&T. But she reappeared for me when I joined CLDP, who do technical assistance programs around the world. And I was working with Iraq, and I noticed that the Iraq-US Strategic Framework Agreement had a note that the United States and Iraq would work to involve Iraq in the IGFs. And I didn't really know the IGFs, and I don't know why. I didn't know why that statement was there. I later asked Marilyn if she put it in there, and she just smiled. She does that sometimes. She did that. She smiled like, maybe I did. And you never knew with Marilyn. She was connected enough. She put things in, or maybe she was okay with it. The people thought she was connected enough to put things in. But that began my involvement with the IGF, and it was a background thing because I come from a telecom background. When I say background, is Marilyn worked behind the scenes, but I worked behind the scenes. And yet over time, it became more and more clear that Marilyn was the key to everything we did, and also the key to the success of our counterparts, especially Afghanistan, which put on, I think, three NRIs, the Afghan IGFs, which my office helped with, but Marilyn made happen. And she had a way of bringing people together and also making sure people did the right thing in the right way. And it was very important for me in Afghanistan because the United States is in a situation where, if I could go to Afghanistan, I couldn't leave our embassy. Marilyn said, I'm going to Afghanistan. I'm just going, and I'm going to help them out. And because we financially supported that effort, I knew that this would not be wasting taxpayer dollars, that this was not going to be, we trusted our colleagues too, that's another factor, our colleagues in Afghanistan, but I knew Marilyn would not let this be a failure. And so I'm so appreciative that I got to know Marilyn. I didn't realize I was as close to her as looking after her. Garland mentioned how we had been concerned about her health. And then in Berlin last year, she was so dedicated. She did an all-day program for a group that I put together from various different countries. And after she was done, then went to the medical people on site in Berlin and said, I'm not feeling so well. And they said, you should be in a hospital. And we went to the hospital together. But I think Marilyn was so dedicated to what she did. She put that above everything, including her health. And we're all better for it. But we're not going to be in the same position with her gone. So thanks for letting me speak.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for sharing. Anya, I wanted to go to you next. I saw your hand go up earlier.
Thank you so much, Dustin, and thank you to many friends and colleagues of Marilyn for such wonderful words. I think this is the first time that I'm able actually to speak about Marilyn. Previously, just because of this disbelief and shock, and I don't even know how to call it. It was just difficult to not to accept, but really to bring to the reality that this could happen, and that it happened to a person that never slept. She was always in a good mood. Her day was always 24 hours, and that energy that I've never seen in my life before, and I'm sure I'm never going to see in as long as I live. My beginnings with knowing Marilyn seems we all have a pattern. I've noticed that when the IGF organized this memorial is that once you step into the internet governance ecosystem on an international level, the very first person you meet is actually Marilyn. And I think we have all in common that, many of us. That's what happened with me. But why this is so difficult for me still to accept is that over the years, actually very immediately after I met her, me and Marilyn became so close, and she was a true friend. And I do have a lot of friends. I'm very fortunate in my life. But I don't know still whether I had such special friend as I had in Marilyn. And our long conversations over Skype, which were happening every actually late night for me, were so fortunate for me. And where, instead of some people go to yoga and those things, I had my calls with Marilyn. Regardless how the day could be difficult, she had that particular humor that just relaxes you. And now with her gone, at the very beginnings, you know how you feel some emptiness, and you feel a bit maybe angry that this thing happened, and that, because those calls will never come to me again, you just can't accept. But with the time going, the only thing that I'm pretty sure is that everything has left with me from Marilyn but emptiness. It's just incredible how many memories, which are so different that the memories you have with all the people, from our time spent in Afghanistan, spending sleepless nights and working on projects, to the IGF, to building the NRIs network. Some of you mentioned the key word, and that's the first word that she taught me. I came at the IGF as relatively young, and that means I didn't really have a lot of patience or understanding for the politics that were inside. And when we started building the NRIs network, I was tasked to look at all the NRIs and ensure that they all respect the principles and so on. And of course, when you look a bit in depth and you see things are not that ideal. So I said, well, Marilyn, I think we just have to remove some NRIs from the list. They can't be recognized until this thing is fixed. Then she said, yes, you are right. But Anya, we are with a vision. And I think she was completely right. With time that showed to be the case. She really believed in a better future for all, and that the internet plays a central role for all. And when how they say that friends are the family we choose, I think she had that chosen family, which was so broad, starting from Garland, that she was always mentioning to me on those long calls, and that actually unfortunately told us this. The latest news about Marilyn, to Joe that technically saved Marilyn's life in Berlin, and to so many of the colleagues from the IGF-USA. From a woman that was carrying a printer in her bag every time she would come at the international conference, to the quickest typer I've ever seen in my life. She would be speaking fluently and so meaningfully on complex topics, completely ad hoc. And privately, probably some of you were close to her. So I had really that, I was so fortunate to be privately close to her. That her life was challenging. And I hope she had some diary or something that somebody could do a movie. It's definitely going to win, best drama award or something like that. And it's just incredible how she was approaching those life difficulties and challenges with such specific humor, and she was overcoming it. Probably something that many people will just not have strength to overcome. So she was so different, so special, so much in my heart, and she definitely shaped me. Somebody mentioned that she had that special relationship with young women. Definitely she had that influence on me, and I'll be always grateful to her, and there's no way I can forget about her. That's her legacy, actually. Thank you so much, Justin, for organizing.
Justin, it's Garland, real quick. If just to relay off on something, I am, because it really is on my mind. It has been since Marilyn's passing. But real quick, I teach a course up at Syracuse University. I live in the Washington D.C. area in Arlington, Virginia, as I said, not far from Maryland, and I. One of the things I do for my course up there, it's information policy and decision making, is have a lot of guest speakers come in. I had like Lee Rainey come in and speak, and he flew up for that. But also anyway, and I approached Marilyn. I said, Marilyn, I really want you to be a distinguished speaker at my class, at my course, and most of the people, with a few exceptions like Lee, I'd known forever, they do it remotely, right? And I was talking to her. She says, no, I know you drive up there in your big red truck. I want to go with you. And I said, so we did a traditional. She drove up with me. We overnighted with friends in. My wife's from Binghamton, New York, which is just about an hour and 10 minutes or so outside of Syracuse, but it's a nice place to drop off. Went in there. The woman that is good friends with my wife and everything was opened her house to us. We had a great meal. Those two got along famously. My wife's friend and Marilyn, they were just to the wee hours talking back and forth. Then we went up. She did the course. She got my class totally engaged in a project for the IGF. We came back, and I've continued to this day to say, that 2 day, I said, I've got to memorialize this somehow. You just reminded me when you're saying that, somehow take a little vignette and sort of try to capture it. But that was so much fun. Just passing the time, chatting all the drive up. And it was an adventure. One of these, things that you could make a movie out of that would be so much fun to do. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just had to pass out because that was, I was so shocked. She said, well, no, I'll go with you, and I said, okay, great. Love the company. So anyway,
Thanks, Garland. That really was a great story. Thank all of you. This service has been very constructive and useful. It is therapeutic to us as her friends. It is a show of respect for someone who greatly deserved it for an amazing life well lived. I ask each of you to honor this woman as we go forward, the lessons that we've learned from her, that we discussed, the threads that we heard here and shared today about being inclusive, being passionate but respectful, that we all continue that in her honor. And I think we're all going to be a lot better for it. Thank you for joining us today for the service, and both for that and the debrief. We will be in touch as we kick off the planning session for next year. And to follow up with some of we'll send out the emails to make sure everybody gets it at the risk of duplicating emails, things like the call for topics and issues that'll come both from the Secretariat of IGF as well as our information as well. So stay safe, guys. We are in the home stretch of this thing. Just stay vigilant, and hopefully we'll all be safe and be able to see one another next year. But between now and then, have a happy holidays, have a happy new year, and let's honor Marilyn going forward and with the respect she deserves. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.